Welcome to another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Today I have with me Nancy Lyons. Nancy, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me first. So I am Nancy Lyons. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of an experience design and technology consultancy called Clockwork. I also am a co-founder of a low-code, no-code agile studio called Tempo, and I've written a couple of books. I'm a keynote speaker, and I'm also for the purpose of this particular podcast, I will share that I'm also a chair emeritus for an organization called Family Equality, which is the leading national organization working for lived and legal equality for LGBTQ plus families and those that want to form them.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And most of our listeners are used to us kind of starting the conversation with just disclosure of identities. So I want to take a moment to see if there are any identities that you'd like to share to anchor us in our conversation.
Sure. Thanks for asking. Well, my pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I am queer, a woman. I am white. I am a mother. I am a spouse. I'm also a badass.
Okay. I love the some of the random identities that come up of like badass. Like I love that as an identity. I gotta add that to the list of
excellent.
Well, so as Nancy and I were just chatting before we were getting started, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation. We were talking about the creating belonging model, and Nancy was sharing an experience that she had with a number of years back when she was going into another organization, I believe, doing some consulting. And so I would love to kind of dig into that story. If you wouldn't mind sharing, let's start there and then see where we go.
Sure. Well, yeah, it was an organization that I actually worked inside of. And I'd sort of worked my way up the ranks. And this was sort of my early managerial career, if you will. And I was learning how to lead people, right? And a lot of it was pretty organic. There wasn't, we were young and it was a technology company and it was in the 90s. And what we knew at the time was we wanted to be values driven and we wanted to bring our authentic selves and we wanted people to have a different experience with this organization than they had had in other workplaces. In other words, we wanted them to feel free to bring their whole selves and to, bring their authentic selves. And this was before the language of belonging was really in play. So we were working really hard to create our own language, but also to make a space that was open to people I don't even think the language of diversity was existed at that point in time. I don't think there certainly wasn't a real effort to create belonging, but the reality was that's what we were trying to create. So in doing that, I think we all sort of coalesced around a shared set of very progressive values, right? We were, we didn't have a dress code. It was a technology company. We made software and websites in the early days of software, internet software and websites. So we didn't have a dress code. We didn't really have a start or end time. It was really results oriented. We were remote before remote was even a conversation in the technology space. We let people sort of build their own schedules, benefit from flexibility, bring their sort of, experiences. And, for me as a queer woman, it was really important for me to be able to be out and safe. Right. And so, we wanted that for everyone else too. And we believed that that's what we were creating. And I had this experience with a colleague who was, just really a gifted engineer. And this was one of those moments that I will never forget. I'm very outgoing. I'm very talkative. He is an engineer who likes to be in quiet spaces in the dark. And we were somehow paired together to drive to Iowa to deliver a pitch to an agricultural organization. And it was in that 6-hour drive in the car, where we were being inundated with the smell of turkey farming. It was thrilling. I remember saying out loud, like, what is that? It's horrible. And interestingly enough, we also enjoyed a couple of fun little side trips, little field trips. on the way back, after we had this moment that I'm about to share with you, we were suddenly so comfortable with each other that we stopped at one of those either sort of living museums, the homestead, farmstead living museum. And
Yeah.
we weren't friends. We weren't close. We barely knew each other. We worked together and he was very quiet. But this moment that I'm about to share actually brought us closer to the point where we were taking pictures of each other standing, in an old farmhouse next to somebody dressed up like Laura Ingalls Wilder. Um, but the moment itself was tense. And I realized, my own failing or my own tunnel vision, because my colleague was telling me how much he appreciated the place where we both worked, but that he was feeling confused and sort of, marginalized. And what he revealed was, while we were so busy trying to create this safe space for everyone, he was feeling like it wasn't okay for him to be a Christian, a person of faith, and that it wasn't okay for him to acknowledge that, to share any of his sort of faith-based interests. A lot of people find community in their churches. He didn't feel safe talking about his church. A lot of people enjoy their family in the context of church or their faith. A lot of people, there's so much that Christianity does to influence how a Christian lives. And what he was trying to explain to me was there was just no room for that. And I have to admit, and I've already admitted to you, that it was a stunning revelation for me, because here I thought I was working hard to make space for everybody, and in fact, I was making space for a lot of people that were perhaps usually marginalized or kept out of those conversations that lead to belonging. But in doing so, I was marginalizing my white Christian colleague. And it made me feel lousy, mostly because I really felt committed to that purpose. Like, in my mind, he should have felt safe being a person of faith in our in the environment we were creating together. He should have felt okay. And I actually had a lot of admiration for him for saying it and not just sort of tamping it down and playing letting his masculinity sort of drive the conversation and not and express himself as not being afraid of anything. I think that was the option. That's certainly where a lot of people would have gone. I'm tough, I'm a leader, I can manage this, it's not important. But clearly his faith was so important to him that he found a moment where it was essential for him to share that. And I think in that moment, you and I were talking about that concept of being overbearing. And I realized as you were talking that that's exactly what I was, that I believed that we all saw the world the same way and that we were all operating under the same set of assumptions. And because of that, I made no room for this man and whomever else identified in a similar way with him on our staff.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you for sharing that. I think, it's interesting because it really drives home the point that, there's some research that I reference in the book around, traditional approaches to DEIB. And you're talking about, a time before those letters existed. And I mean, I definitely remember, when I started the work, it was just diversity, and that was in, the 2000s. And so, yeah, the DEIB wasn't in that lexicon back then. But as we look at the research and the typical approaches and some of the challenges, that kind of multicultural approach, which is much more common today, where difference is celebrated, non-marginalized individuals are celebrated, which is great. It is off-putting or makes others feel marginalized who aren't typically marginalized. And it's interesting because for me, the biggest thing is like, I don't know how many times I say this whenever I reference that work, it's not that I have a problem with making white men uncomfortable, including myself. But the problem is that they're often the people that we need to get on board to help make room for everyone, right? And ensure that our inclusion and belonging efforts are actually working. So it's interesting. Um, I'm curious to dig into that a little bit more. Like, what else did he share in that conversation that made him feel, um, othered or marginalized?
Well, I do think that, because, uh, the time was the 90s, the late 90s.
Mm.
Um, I'm aging myself here, but we were all very young. We were sort of typical Gen Xers. It was, we looked like we were out of a movie, like a Winona Ryder, Ethan Hawke movie, right? Like Reality Bites. We were all wearing our flannel and our jeans. We were nonconformists. We were going to make change, So in some ways, we were rejecting the establishment. And
Yeah.
I think what he represented, for himself in the context of all that was exactly what we were rejecting. And, it was interesting because he was a pretty shy guy. So he wasn't terribly, the conversation wasn't really lengthy. He didn't spend a lot of time like emoting. He was very direct. And, when I think about it, I'm not naming this person for a variety of reasons, but when you think about it over time, what I've realized is that he too probably lived in the context of a number of identities, one of which may have been neurodivergent, because the way that he expressed this, and I'm not trying to diagnose somebody that I'm not close to, but the way that he expressed it was so matter of fact and so direct and so sort of lacking in additional details that I wish I could answer that question in a thrilling way for you. What he said was pretty point blank. It was, I don't feel safe being Christian, and I don't think you all think about, those people in your midst that have values that are different from yours. And to me, here's the thing. I think values are something that we can share regardless of our identities, right?
Mhm.
Like for me, you can be a Christian, and I am a person of faith, probably more on the agnostic side, just because I think there's no way this all just, I believe in science, but I
Mhm.
also believe science may have come from, we don't need to get into me. My point is, I believe that people who don't believe in Christianity can also live by a moral code that resembles, and I'm gonna tread lightly here, the good side of Christian morality, right? Not the judgmental, um, uh, uh, I don't know, not the judgmental, difficult side that sometimes I witness in the world. The condemnation, the hellfire and damnation. But the teachings of Jesus are really the ideal moral code. Whether you believe in Jesus as the Son of God or Jesus as a prophet or a man walking the earth, this idea that we should love each other as we love ourselves, that we should do right by our neighbor, that we shouldn't harm others or be selfish, that we should share and care for one another. My God. I mean, there's no reason for us not to be able to subscribe to a moral code that looks like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was interesting to me that he was actually speaking of values and suggesting that we didn't share them, when in fact, I think, part of the reason why I was so deluded at the time is because I guess I thought we all just want to care for each other. We all just want to collaborate and share. We all just want to make space for one another. We all want to feel safe at work. And there was something about his Christianity that he didn't articulate in that moment that made him feel like it wasn't safe. Now, I will say we had very vocal, and this was also before HR was terribly advanced, and caught up to the current cultural conversation. We had very vocal people who condemned Christianity at the time, not in a hateful way, but just in a dismissive way. And so I'm sure that someone actually said something, around him that made him feel small. And I
Yeah.
think that may have been what he was reacting to. And like I said, I think it was a super brave thing for him to bring up. And it was something that I was able to address in a more covert way when I got home. It wasn't like I was like, we're going to love Christians now. Let's make space for the Christians. But I was able to, speak to the leadership team and the rest of the staff in a different setting, just about our need to really expand our definition of inclusion. What that can't just be people that agree with us. And
Mhm.
actually, I think that's what the world is suffering from right now, right? Like, we want to be inclusive only if we all feel the same way about how things work. And
Yeah.
it's not possible.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so many directions I want to go.
Sorry.
I'm going to start with values because um, I, I know I've told the story several times and maybe even on the podcast, but I'm going to share it with you kind of in the context of this because I think it's meaningful. So several years ago in my work of diversity, I worked for a very large global organization. So diversity there is like, we're literally in, many, many countries. So let's start with the fact that we are by nature a very diverse organization and very culturally diverse. Anyway, I ended a session on diversity when the message was about, um, holding people in a place of acceptance, and appreciation, and that tolerance is not enough. That, it like if you've ever felt tolerated, that's just not actually a great feeling. And there was a woman who came up to me after the session and, very unironically, said, Justin, my faith tells me that I can't accept gay people. And so, you're telling me that the organization is telling me that I need to accept gay people, but my faith tells me that I can't. And, in front of me, like, which I, love the irony and of course have to conjure up all kinds of strength in that moment of like, okay, well, let's have the right conversation here and calmly. And I did say, look, it sounds like your values may not align with the values of your employer. And you may need to evaluate that and choose whether you want to work for an employer that has values that don't align with yours. The interesting part of that, and this is going to dovetail into what you were saying of that kind of general moral code, is I'm like, I I don't think if of the Christian faith, I don't think anybody said don't accept gay people. You can interpret, I'm not going to debate, like, interpret 5,000 ways of the scripture of whether it's right or wrong. However, there are some specific things that I understand about the Christian faith that are like, love others as yourself, accept everyone, judge no one, like all of those kinds of things that don't line up, right? So I just think it's interesting. Anyway, I'm going to pause there and get some reactions.
Yeah, actually, if I may, I'd like to share another really interesting story in it, and it touches on what you just said.
Yeah.
And it also speaks to my own evolution as a leader. So cut to later in the 2000s when I was a co-founder of the company that I am the CEO of now. We've been around a long time. I think that's the story you're hearing. So have I, ancient. I had really worked hard to make space for people that had, different opinions and different belief systems from me, from us. And over the years, at this point, I'd had some really interesting conversations with other folks of faith who were deeply enmeshed in, dogma, and religion and communities of religion, and enjoyed those conversations. And I had a young man who had started with us. I think if he didn't start as an intern, he started as a very junior level front end engineer / designer. And he and I had become, it's so different from now because it was so early in our story that I had relationships with everybody. And now I don't work on the delivery side of the business. So it's so different to even think about this. And this story is probably going to stun folks that I work with too. And he and I had an opportunity to get to know each other a little. We had done some of our one-on-ones, and I'm a very approachable person. Once you get to know me, people tell me all the time, "Oh, you scare me." It's like, cool. But whatever. I can't do anything about it. I'm big. That's my personality. That's what it is. But this young man had gotten to a place where he felt comfortable enough to approach me. And I always encourage, I have this open door. You can direct message me anytime. We can have any conversation you want. If there's, if you need counsel or mentoring or you have criticism or feedback, I'm open, right? And this fellow, we were all sort of working on a tight deadline. It was nighttime. We were all in our homes. And this was when, I don't know if we were using like IRC. It was before Slack. It was before Slack days. And we were using some direct messaging application. He messaged me and I opened the message and he said, I don't want to fight about you, but how do you feel about the fact that you're going to hell? And it was like, I'm the CEO and he is the newest hire at the juniorest level. And, in any other organization that would be problematic. So I was proud that it wasn't in my own, I can honestly say, regardless of my personal feelings or my personal relationships inside of the organization, there have only been one or two times where I have really given myself grief for treating somebody unfairly. But for the most part, I really work not to treat anybody unfairly or to operate out of, taking something personally. I can't say that I don't operate from emotion. So he asked me how I felt about going to hell. And I thought about it a minute. And I remembered I had this mentor who was also a person of faith. And he and I had a conversation and he shared, this little bit of wisdom with me that I then shared with this young man. And I said, I don't profess to being capable of speaking for God. I sometimes worry about people who are. And I certainly don't take aspects of the Bible literally because it has been through so much and so many translations and so many writings and rewritings. And let's not even start with the origins and why it was written in the first place. But what I do know is that when Christ was asked what God really wants from us, what he really wants from us, he said simply to love God and love each other. And I know that I do that. I know that I am showing up for the thing that Christ said God cares about the most. And when I think about God, I may not think about the same being that you do, but God also said we are made in his image. So taking a page from your scripture, if I love people, if I truly care for people, I am doing what your God is asking of me. And I don't feel like that God is going to condemn me to torment because I do genuinely care about people and I do work to help those that are less fortunate than me or to work to create spaces where marginalized people can exist freely and openly. I do work to be a decent employer and a decent human, and I'm not a greedy, white lady. And he really accepted that. I mean, I think it really threw him off, right? He was hoping to challenge me, and I think he didn't know how to respond to it. And we actually became very close and are still in touch to this day. He no longer works with us. He's now a leader in his own right in a company. I actually saw a picture of him recently. He's bald. That's how old I am. I have a young man who has grown up and is now bald on my network. But it was I was glad to have that response for him. And it's helped inform how I respond to other people that ask equally as difficult questions relative to their Christianity.
Yeah. It's such a great response. And and it also just makes me think of like, okay, so the individual who initiated that conversation, like, what's the objective?
Mm-hmm.
Is the objective to have an argument, or is the objective to convert you to something? Like, what's the um but I love that I love your response, and I love how that landed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's actually a really lovely guy. He was so young, and so young and so influenced by his parents and his church, and so he I don't think he'd gotten to a point where critical thinking was part of his, resume, if you will. And I think he's matured, and I doubt that he would ever ask a CEO of a company that question again. But we have great respect for each other, and he is still a fine Christian man that, I think he's a lovely guy. But I do think, to your question, was he trying to have a fight? I actually think he was worried about me. I think that was it. I think it was such a, he wanted to challenge me, but I think he was worried about me. He was worried about my soul. And, I hope that what I said to him made him realize that my soul is not for him to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not
That's
where I thought our conversation was going to go, by the way. This is fast. I've talked more about Christianity today than I have in the last 10 years. We're welcome.
I know. So I love it though. I love it because about 2 months ago. Um I'm working on the second edition of the book, and I'm thinking about like what are the chapters I'm adding? What's the research I want to add? And it is not in the outline yet, and I'm not sure I'm committed to or would put it in, but I've thought about a religion chapter, creating belonging and religion, because so much exclusion happens in the name of religion. And I'm not saying that all religions are exclusive, but I am
Mm-hmm.
saying exclusion happens in the name of religion. And you know, if you look at the religion that I'm most familiar with, being Christianity, I'm like, just like you say, like actually, if we're really examining it, that's not like we need to be inclusive. That's what,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what we're told.
Mm-hmm.
And so really examining that, but I'm um just putting it out there that I've entertained it, but it seems like a really deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, that would be quite the quagmire. And yet, I love the idea of it. I do. Because I think religion is being weaponized. And at its core, there's nothing wrong with faith.
Mhm.
Faith is what has gotten us through generations of trauma.
Mhm.
You know, for many people, not all. And so I think if we could find a way to find each other in spite of and through and with our faith,
Mhm.
I think that would be phenomenal. I mean, think about it right now. Our government is weaponizing religion, and religion is weaponizing our government against, a huge faction of the population. And
Mhm.
it's really troubling and unfortunate. It's unfortunate. You know,
Mhm.
I was raised in an Irish Catholic family. My my mother converted from baptism. That was my grandma didn't care that I was gay, but she was really upset that my mom went from Baptist to
Oh, wow.
Catholicism. Um and at our core, we all, I would go to the Baptist church when I visited my grandmother. We all, at our core, the message, the values, the ways of being, the expectations are so similar. I mean, there's much more ritual and money, quite frankly, in the Catholic Church. Don't get me started. But,
Yeah.
at its core, my grandmother was a deeply loving, God fearing, but generous, caring human being.
Mhm.
And, my parents were decent human beings too, or are decent. Well, one of them are and were. Um, and I think a lot of it came from how they felt about their faith. But I couldn't subscribe because the the institution didn't want me. And then I became a more critical thinker as a result.
Yeah. 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 I've talked a bit about my evolution as well, over the years in the work. So I'll save that, um, those times. But I think so. To close us out, I just want to grab this like um interesting parallel of because I'm always tying it back to the model.
Mm-hmm.
Let's back
Mm-hmm.
to the belonging model, and it's so interesting of like actually in what your response to that employee was. We are made in his image, and so we are a celebration of God, right? And so if we think about authenticity
Mm-hmm.
in showing up as ourselves and loving ourselves as being made in his own image
Mm-hmm.
and loving others,
Mm-hmm.
being acceptance. That's it. That's the creating belonging model.
It's everything.
I mean, maybe it all goes back to my roots of my oh, what do you call it? Oh my gosh, no, I can't think of it. Like confirmation.
Oh, confirmation. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The seeds were planted. All
Yeah.
of
Well,
these.
the essence of all of it, the essence of faith, the essence of spirituality is good and whole and decent. It's people who have corrupted and weaponized
Mhm,
those things. But I think what
mhm.
you just said is the reason I am on this earth.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Me too.
All
I
right.
love it.
We're going to hug
Nancy,
when we meet
okay.
in person.
I know we definitely will meet in person.
Yeah.
And I love where this conversation went today. Totally not what I expected on this Tuesday afternoon. But this is amazing. Um, Nancy, real quick before we close out, how can people find you and get in touch with you?
Oh, well, easy. I have a website. My personal website for my speaking and my books is nancylyons.com. Super easy, Lyons. You can find my company Clockwork at clockwork.com. You can find Tempo at madebytempo.com. And you can find me on all the socials at Nylons. That's because I've been on there a really long time and my name is Nancy Lyons and N Lyons. Everybody saw nylon, so I used it. But now the young people don't even know what nylons are. So that's a whole other podcast.
There's this great Gen X meme that I've seen recently that is like something like regret is your first screen names on the internet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, that's a good one. I got to find it.
Great. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. And everyone else, stay tuned for another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.